Greetings, I'm Dr. Eileen O'Connor, and I'm going to review the history of my work with immersive virtual reality within online graduate courses, primarily focusing on the work I've done at SUNY Empire State College. My interest really began when I started working for an engineering school, RPI, in Troy, New York, and saw how devoted the students were to online games. Now, this was in the 1990s. When I joined SUNY Empire State College, I discovered that Second Life could provide such opportunities. However, over time, the cost of having Second Life became prohibitive. To consider key events in this historical development of the gradual integration of virtual reality into work, particularly in the Mallet program, here are some of the pivotal times. The general introduction of Second Life began around 26 with Empire State College work in Second Life itself. The investigation into the open source environment, though, became necessary in about late 2012 when Empire State College launched the MALET program, and the cost of maintaining the social environment through Second Life became prohibitive. Over time, though, the open source environment had created more available and less expensive social platforms that could be used for virtual reality. And what we've discovered most recently is in the past 5 or so years, students have been creating their own environments, and we've expanded into virtual residencies and into a think tank created by students and alums. Starting back at the beginning, when SUNY Empire first moved into virtual reality environments, it was through Second Life. And through grant money, there was sufficient funding to have artists develop renderings of some of the key physical buildings on campus and bring them into the VR space. Several faculty got particularly involved and proceeded on their own efforts to bring about the introduction of these spaces to other faculty and to instructional designers. They ran a series of professional development explorations and activities between 2011 and 2013. During this initial development time, I was able to secure funding for a private island and brought in a group of middle school students, and they explored the space, and we looked at ways that youth could work in these type of environments. The slide shows here one of the publications and presentations that followed from the research that I focused on there. A bit later, though, simultaneously, as I had already started moving over into the open source, more affordable environments, it was possible to have the instructors actually develop their own online supportive components. And this collage represents poster sessions that were held where students could show their own work. These created opportunities for students to hear presentations from others, and there were now other ways of meeting that went beyond simply online courses and moved into the VR spaces. As I worked with these new forms of social interactions, I procured permission from the Institutional Review Board and gathered data about the interactions. In this slide, you'll see sections from a publication where I had studied to see if there was any increase in collegiality among these science teachers. At this point, I was using VR settings as a type of informal sandbox level building where the students struggled with creating interesting avatar and settings, and my research did show that the students were becoming more comfortable with each other in an online format, even though they never met face-to-face. And as the Mallet program expanded and electives were created, a course was developed to help students create their own environments. Again, one of the values of using open source was that it was lower cost, and it also had the ability to be populated by environments, artifacts, and components that had been made available through Creative Commons licensing. Thus, they were able to use, with relatively low skills, environments that these students could create that were both rich and interesting. The course was designed to help them move through an entry-level functional education approach to creating these environments. The course's intention was not to turn these students into advanced game design developers for the big commercial companies, but to get them to develop these spaces for use with their own particular clients and client needs. So a small example of these projects follows. Here's the backdrop that was chosen by a social worker who was creating a space for having other social workers who worked with court-appointed residencies, have an environment where parents and children could come together and create more effective bonds. The buildings that you see here were selected because they look like the settings where the original theories were developed, and the artifacts were then quickly assembled and turned into a working space. This particular social worker was very enthusiastic about his work and actually can be seen here presenting his work at an international conference. Here he's explaining to others how this environment works. Another student, who was a professional videographer, created an island and developed simulated versions of advanced videography equipment with sound booms, tracks, and the likes, and provided a training and design environment for actually teaching video production skills. Yet another student was developing training materials for a financial concern that wanted to have better understanding from K-12 youth about how to create budgets and determine what was affordable. The game-like appearance was deemed as possibly enticing more students into this financial study. Once participants moved inside the building, they had choices to be made around different items that they could purchase, and then determine if and how it impacted their budget bottom line. Another student worked with clientele who came from different countries and were becoming acclimated to American culture, American shopping, and American community spaces. Her participants could come in without feeling that they needed to be communicative in their non-native language right away. A social study teacher used pre-developed and also self-designed artifacts to show the historical settings in Japan in the late 1600s, thereby providing a more engaging experience for these students. And some students worked in total creativity, as you can see with this graphic artist who designed complete free-form objects and developed a totally organic and futuristic VR experience for avatar visitors. And right from the start, students began attending VR conferences and explaining their own work, as you can see in this community conference. This slide and the next list some of the contents that were actually developed as students made their individual islands. Many of these students chose to extend their work into their final projects or capstones, where they further explored and delineated their ideas. The link on these pages brings you to the location of the islands and shows you videos of how the students explained their own work and their own design. As the student work was progressing so well, more ways were established for using these islands. An immersive virtual reality residency was begun, where first-year students could take introductory courses and not have to go through the travel and the cost. This began in 2018. The dean came and launched the project, citing it as a strategic initiative looking at ways that online communication could become richer and more collegial. This residency has now become an annual event, particularly important during the times of a pandemic when travel is limited, but it was initially designed to really give students an opportunity to meet with faculty and with colleagues in an environment that was constructed so that there could be both formal and informal opportunities to work on a graduate level. You're going to find links on this page and the previous one that explain the specifics of the residencies, also direct you to research that was conducted on this format, and give you information from some of the actual activities during the residencies. As the number of students who had worked on developing these environments increased, and as they began to graduate, it became important to keep this base of innovators connected and to expand their work. The Institute of New Paradigms was initially designed in the fall of 2017 and began meeting in spring 2018. Since then, this group has met regularly. They have embraced new supporters from around the country and around the world, and they're developing expertise that's looking at the many new paradigms that are becoming possible through virtual and other emerging technologies. This group has been most timely in the time of COVID, when we need to find more ways of networking. Stepping back now to look at the Mallet program itself and how the concept of virtual reality is introduced right in the introductory course. The last module of this course, the final 3 weeks, have students broken into teams to work collaboratively on a project at a distance. Remember, these colleagues have never met face to face. This final project is launched with a rather freewheeling sandbox level that is, without a lot of instruction, just playing with some of the basic artifacts, which becomes an opportunity to see how the spaces were made. In this image, students are taking items that were available and changing them and repurposing them. This collaborative project has been a cornerstone of the introductory course, but particularly in the year of 2020, the focus looked towards ways that emerging and immersive technologies could help with the global pandemic. In the spring of 2020, one of the teams chose to work on the comparison between the bubonic plague and the early stages of COVID. Now, this was back in May and April, and the VR setting actually had a rather dour look. There was one of the islands that looked like a medieval setting, and the student used this as a jumping off point to talk about the spread of disease. The link on this page brings you to the presentation made by these students, where they compared treatment procedures during these two different pandemic crises. Another one of the teams in the spring looked at how you might prepare our modern-day society for responding to these challenges and getting people prepared for emergency situations. If you follow the link here, you'll find some of the creative solutions suggested by this team. In the fall of 2020, there was a very large class. People were recognizing the need to learn how to integrate technology into learning and communication. So we set up 10 teams. Each was tasked with coming up with a learning or communication project that might now be mediated through a combination of online or blended scenarios. Students chose their particular content area within their team. Very interesting results developed. The link on this page shows the project website created by this class. Each team had a page. The different projects can be seen here, and interestingly, one of the projects looked at using Mozilla Hubs, which is a very interesting and easy to use technology from the user's point of view, and these students showed how they might use it for a social studies suffragette project. The students voted on their work, and peer-reviewed badges were given to the teams receiving the most votes. A STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, with art sometimes included in the mix, built upon the STEM and emerging technology certificate that we've created. The virtual reality environment is being used in the Mallet program to find opportunities to explore how STEM could be initiated into the form of even role-playing games within these spaces. To illustrate how STEM possibilities could be launched into a VR space, you're going to see this companion slideshow that was created, and there's a link to it here. There is access in the slides to the type of desert oasis environment that is shown in the virtual reality space, and it could be used to launch a hydrological study. For instance, what is the appropriate use of water resources in desert environments? And how does one balance the needs for entertainment and tourism with the life and plight of the local denizens? From a social studies perspective, the exploration of buildings of fortresses, castles, and walled cities could tie together many times in the past and in the present, and could lead to interesting discussions of architecture, culture, and warfare. Also, these beautifully built castles, made available by Creative Commons artists, could launch plays and studies that could integrate the plays that have been done within these types of historical settings. And in the study of disease spreading, which has always been important as long as people have shared and interacted, the resources made available here about the Black Plague became even more poignant as we moved into the COVID era in 2020. As shown in an earlier slide, the very stark-looking medieval environment that was again made available by artists served as a backdrop to a productive study of disease transmission, and methods of coping with a mixture of different cultures and with different germs. And on a lighter side, where else but in a virtual environment could you have a selfie taken with a non-playing character who came from the Middle Ages himself? Courses within the STEM certificate have spurred many interesting studies. Just a few of the highlights are going to be shown here. An emphasis is being placed on taking these STEM concepts further beyond the academic classrooms. and integrate them more back into the local community efforts. This type of work is currently underway. Consider several types of new integrations that are shown here. One student developed a study for a migrant population in his particular community. And here, the student developed the study where 360 cameras would be used to show different environments to allow the students to create stories about their own particular homeland and about new areas in which they've been involved. Another student found ways to use 360 cameras and headsets to simulate the docking of different ships at sea. In the past, this had been studied and training had been done through expensive simulated programs. The 360 camera was providing additional flexibility. This particular student received a grant to get more advanced computer equipment. A woman entrepreneur with her own computer training company developed a VR environment and brought her clients together within the space so they could experience the new ways of communicating that were becoming possible. Plus, it gave her additional credibility as being a future-thinking businesswoman. A number of students have been developing ideas and prototypes for healthcare environments. These environments need to have realistic clinical practice trainings, which are often very difficult to do. This particular student developed a prototype for an augmented reality enhancement to the mannequins that are used commonly in nursing care training. And even a student who is developing commercial training for an insurance company found ways to create a virtual reality environment that could simulate the different types of accidents and liabilities that could happen, and then she could also provide the professional development training within the virtual environment itself, eliminating the need for travel and expensive hotels. Considering that this was created before the COVID pandemic, you can see how futuristic her thinking was. In summarizing where and how this particular program has found the benefits of virtual reality, consider on the plus side, the value has already been strongly suggested in the research that's been conducted both in advance of any of these designs and during the actual implementation. My work has documented much of the materials that I've used. I've made them available through Creative Commons licensing, and the links are within the document. You don't have to start from scratch. The courses have run well and generally functioned on an implementation level. That is, if you want to create very exotic simulations, you're going to need more extensive development. But these simpler virtual reality environments can serve as a good proof of concept to bring together grant funding for additional computers and additional graphic support. And as these environments become more available, they become a very rich means of having interacting and reality-based experiences in a social environment, social distance environments. Now, looking at some of the challenges, one of the initial hurdles had been the downloading of a viewer and being able to get the navigation going. As the environments are very rich, in theory, you can do anything. So what you also need to do is develop particular curriculum and objectives. To make all of this happen, funding is going to be important. And also groups such as the Institute for New Paradigms are there to help others develop good approaches within their own environments. But probably the most important for developers, for faculty and instructional designers, is that these environments have to be valued for the serious content and community development that's possible within these spaces. They're not simply games, although they can certainly be games as well. VR communities can support strong learning and communication goals and objectives. So planning and developing within these spaces needs to be considered part of legitimate research and development. Much has already been done in the groundwork that has been laid to establish the value and efficacy of using these environments. Communities need to be developed to help one another to move forward with these spaces. It's very possible now with the open source environments to take entire islands that have been created and share them among different institutions with the faculty and the instructional designers there. Hopefully we can develop more community-based efforts to share the dissemination of these environments and their use for purposeful academic and communication endeavors.